Today marks the beginning of what we recognize on the Christian calendar as Holy Week. And it's a time where we pause to remember and reflect on the death of Jesus. And it's also a time where we remember and celebrate his resurrection. Today we know as Palm Sunday, and when we think about that, some of us maybe think, okay, Palm Sunday, what does that mean? I'm not really sure. Some of us recognize it as, oh, that's the Sunday before Easter. And maybe some of us, can remember back from Sunday school or other church experience and remember that, oh, Palm Sunday is the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and palms are somehow involved. But this year, today, rather than looking at the details and the symbolism that's involved in the biblical accounts of the events that we mark as Holy Week, I want us as a church, a faith community, to just simply step into the story of that historical week and learn how it applies to each of us personally today, 2,000 years after the fact. So today, Palm Sunday, we look back to that 1 week before Easter, and back biblically, we're looking at a time period that was shortly after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and Jesus became aware of a plot to take his life. There was a group of people called the Pharisees that were really threatened by his ministry, by his existence, and they had plotted to take his life. And Jesus had, for a short period of time, actually gone into hiding, we'll say. Just went and kind of existed out in the wilderness, staying away from people in populated areas, and spent time with his disciples. And then, as Passover approached, as the time of the Jewish celebration of Passover approached, many people were wondering whether Jesus would actually appear or whether he would remain in hiding. Whether he would come to Jerusalem where Passover was primarily celebrated, or would he simply stay where he's at? Would he participate in the Passover celebration at all? And this is interesting because this comes at a point in time where with the common people, the everyday people, Jesus' popularity was almost at an all-time high. So people were watching this closely. If it were in this day and age, it would be something that would be on the 24-hour news cycle. It's something that we would be looking at the really credible magazines that are at the checkout stand and looking at the headlines. They would be talking about this. Is Jesus going to be at Passover or not? So this is something that was on people's minds and was part of conversation, part of their discussion. Was he going to be there or not? Well, as we look at the biblical account of these events presented across the four Gospels, we know that Jesus did opt to participate in the Passover celebration. And this day, Palm Sunday, marks the day that he traveled into Jerusalem at the beginning of the Passover week. So as the biblical account goes, Jesus and his disciples left the area where they were staying and traveled to a town called Bethany. And this is where the story really comes to life and gets interesting. It's a story called Bethany. Bethany was about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, which interestingly was the distance that they were limited to travel on the day of the Sabbath. By the law that the Pharisees had created based on Old Testament teaching, people of the Jewish faith were not allowed to travel any further than 2 miles on the Sabbath. So Jesus had traveled to Bethany, and when he arrived at Bethany, he sent his disciples to retrieve for him a donkey, which is pretty unique because aside from traveling in a boat, the Bible only talks of Jesus traveling by foot, by walking. So this is the only time that we see him gaining some means of transportation by land, and that kind of should mark in our heads, this is a unique event. This is unique circumstances here. So his disciples go and retrieve a donkey for him. As he instructed, they went to the owners of this donkey and went to take it. And the owners asked them what they're doing. And they responded as Jesus instructed them to and said, the Lord needs it. And because Jesus was kind of well-known and popular at that time based on the miracles he had been doing, and in particular raising Lazarus from the dead, the owners were fine with it. They said, okay, go take the donkey, let him use it. Let him use it. And this is kind of a significant point in the story as well, that Jesus chose and requested a donkey to ride into Jerusalem at this time of the Passover. It's significant in a couple of ways. One way is that about 500 years previous to that time, the prophet Zechariah talked about how the king, the Messiah king, would ride in on a donkey. And certainly some portion of the people that were there for this event would have known and been familiar with that prophecy. But probably more well known at that point in time was the cultural tradition in that area of the world where as a king entered a city, they would enter in one of two ways. They would enter either on a donkey or on a horse. If a king rode into your town on a horse, you knew war was coming your way. He was coming as a warrior. If a king rode into your town, into your city on a donkey, he was coming in peace. That was just the way the world worked at that point in time, and everybody there knew that. So Jesus was choosing symbolically to ride in communicating peace, not war. Communicating peace, not war. So Jesus mounted the donkey and began to ride into Jerusalem at that point in time. Now we have to remember that during the time of the Passover feast and celebration, Jerusalem, which was and still is a large city, was really almost overfull. It was jam-packed. It was bustling with activity as people of the Jewish faith from really all over the world came into town for the Passover celebration, for Passover week. So Jerusalem was really bursting at the seams with people. As was this road that Jesus was making his 2-mile trek into Jerusalem on. Today that road is referred to as Hosanna Road, but it was simply a road between two towns then. And because of its proximity to Jerusalem and being the limit of travel for the Sabbath, it was very crowded at that point in time as well. So Jews from all over the world are in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Jerusalem was under Roman rule at that point in time as well. And so because it was a big deal for the Jewish people, Roman leadership was present also. They wanted to make sure that there were no problems that would break out. Politically, it was a significant thing for them to say, even though you're part of our empire, we support your traditions and we're going to allow you to do this. And as such, Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, was already there in Jerusalem along with the full complement of Roman soldiers. And Herod Antipas, who was the king of Galilee, also perhaps known for beheading John the Baptist, he had already arrived with much fanfare as well. So we see two political leaders who, by right, by custom, would have had the option of riding into Jerusalem already on their choice of donkey or horse. And now Jesus is coming in a way that he's proclaiming himself as the king as well. So Jesus enters, signifying that he's coming in peace. And as a result of all the fanfare and all the busyness that comes along with Passover, and now here's Jesus proclaiming himself to the world as king, coming into town. It created, as you can imagine, quite a stir. Crowds gathered around to see what was going on. A parade of sorts really kind of quickly formed as people started clearing the road for Jesus so that he could ride on ahead unobstructed. They were lining the sides of the streets. People were following him. Where the palms come into play is they were holding palm branches over top of him as a matter of shade but also that's a way that they treated political leaders at the time as well. So the people that were surrounding Jesus and seeing him riding in as king were understanding to some degree the prophecy that would say one day a king would come and this king would be their king forever. But at the same time, they were watching this unfold and they were celebrating, they were glad, they were grateful, but they were looking at it as, here's Jesus and he's going to be our earthly king forever. They're treating him as an earthly king. So as this crowd formed, we can look and see and understand that within that crowd there were people that followed Jesus. There were people that loved Jesus. There were people that hated Jesus. And there were people that were simply caught up in the moment, caught up in the energy of the moment. How many of you have ever been in a parade? Has anybody here ever been in a parade? Yeah? It's an interesting thing. Probably most of us, I'm going to assume, have been to a parade. And parades are kind of fun to stand on the side of the street and watch as they go by. Being in a parade is completely different. Because being in a parade, you see what's in front of you the entire length of that parade. You have no idea what the rest of the parade looks like. You just know what's in front of you. And so as a result, it can be, kind of boring, but my experience is eventually to break the boredom, you start noticing some of the people that are around you. You start noticing some of the faces, some of the expressions that people have. You might see a small child doing something that's cute or humorous. You might see somebody that's sitting at a parade but looking really rather grumpy and you wonder why they're there. And so as this parade kind of formed around Jesus, we should imagine the faces that Jesus saw as the crowd shouted to him. They shouted, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And this crowd, as they were shouting this, you can imagine Jesus looking out. And I'm sure he saw looks of adoration as people appreciated him for their understanding of who he was, looks of joy and happiness, and for sure he also saw looks of scorn. He probably saw the faces of the 10 lepers who he had healed earlier in his ministry. He probably also saw Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, who received sight at his hands. He also would have seen his friends Mary and Martha and Lazarus, whom he had just raised from the dead a few days previous. And he also saw the Pharisees, the people who opposed what he was doing, the people who accused him of committing blasphemy, of acting and speaking against God. And he saw the Pharisees who, in their scorn, out of their hatred for him, who would, in just a few days from this event, take this crowd that was celebrating Jesus and turn that crowd against him. So as the energy, the cheers, and the praise from this parade kind of reaches its peak, the parade stops. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. Those that can see Jesus look at him, and they notice his head hanging low and his body quivering. Maybe the joy is overpowering, and maybe Jesus is sitting there laughing. Some of them surely thought. But then they caught a glimpse of his face, and they see that he was crying. So to find out why Jesus was crying, we're going to take a look at Luke chapter 19, verses 41 through 44. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. See, Jesus was crying because he came for those people that were there. Those people who that would, in a few days, accuse him. And those people that he would gratefully and lovingly die for. But yet, they did not understand. So today, we need to take a look at this and ask ourselves, if Jesus were making this very same journey today, what would he do? Would he have reason to cry? See, just like then, today we have three groups of people in our society. We have people that love Jesus. And within that group of people that love Jesus, we have a small portion that are truly living a life of surrender. But we have others, the larger portion, who say, well, Jesus, I love you, and I'm going to come to church, and I'm going to do my best, and I hope that's okay. And then there's people that hate Jesus. We can look at those, the people that are honest about it. We would call them atheists. But there's many people who live their lives directly opposite of Jesus as well. And those folks we would consider as people that hate Jesus. By their actions, they're going against him. By the things that they say, they're maybe even speaking boldly against him. And then we have the third group, the largest group in our population today, just as it was then. We have people that, we would call them people that are on the bandwagon, one way or the other. Whichever way emotion is going, whichever way society is going, that's where they want to go. And so people today that are on the bandwagon are people that, when church is a great thing to do and most of their friends and family are going to church, yeah, they'll come to church. Or when most of their friends and family are at the ball game or, maybe partying on Saturday night and sleeping in on Sunday morning, they'll do that. And people on the bandwagon are people who, maybe even will recognize that God is for real and that Jesus was his son because that's what they've been taught somewhere in Sunday school or Bible school or whatever. But their day-to-day life has no room for God at all. And that's the largest group in our society. And just like then, today we try to mold Jesus, the Messiah, into our image rather than letting him mold us into his image. See, remember back then when this happened that everybody there, even the people that loved Jesus, were expecting a political leader that was going to bring stability and power and authority worldwide to Jerusalem. And he would be their leader forever. And that was going to be great. That was their image of the Messiah. There was no room in their understanding of their image of Jesus to allow for someone who loved the poor, didn't really care a whole lot about politics, that wanted to help the broken, that wanted to heal the hurting, that wanted to just pour out love on people and bring them into relationship with God. That wasn't their image of Jesus. Today, what's our image of Jesus? As we sit here, do we try to mold him into what we think he is and what he should be? Is he an entity in our life that we kind of keep in our back pocket to pull out when we need it? Do we just rely on him when we have a need and otherwise just put him off to the side? Or do we allow him to guide every step, every thought, every action of our lives? Are we making Jesus into our own image, or are we allowing him to shape us into his image? And in verses 43 and 44 of Luke 19, Jesus talked about the destruction that would come upon Jerusalem as a result of their not understanding him, not accepting him, not recognizing that he was a gift from God and that he was there to save them, not accepting that peace that he came to offer them. Jesus talked about the destruction that would come on Jerusalem. Historically, we look at this time period as an event that happened in about 70 AD when Titus came as a Roman leader and really destroyed Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, and the temple. We can also look at this, and biblical scholars back up this viewpoint. We can also look at this time period of the coming destruction of the world as we know it, when God's final judgment comes upon us. And see, remember, at this point in time, as we celebrate Palm Sunday, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, signifying peace, as the King coming in peace. But in that time, when he returns, he'll come first on a horse, ready for battle, ready to vindicate what has been done against him and his Father and his followers. So we see a real clear distinction here. You know, we have this choice that we face. Are we going to be like the Jews were at that point in time, and not really recognize Jesus for who he is, have a brief moment of fanfare, and allow ourselves to be swayed against him? Or are we going to recognize him for who he is and accept that true peace that he offers us? Because, see, for the people that accept that true peace that he offers us, it doesn't matter what destruction comes into our life. Whether it's personal hardship, whether it's destruction that affects our community or our country or our society, it doesn't matter. Because we have the peace of knowing that we're living according to God's will, that we're living according to his plan. And that's the peace that Jesus talks about. So I want you to think about, where does your peace come from today? Is your peace, your sense of peace, kind of like the Jews at that point in time? Or does your peace come from Jesus? I also want you to think about, which group do you truly fit in? You know, if the events of that day that we recognize today on Palm Sunday were to happen now, would you be in the group of people that loves Jesus? And if you were, would you be in the group of people, the subgroup that loves him by name? Or would you be in the group that lives a life of surrender to him? Or would you be in the group that hates Jesus? Maybe not by your words, but by your actions. Or would you be in the third group, who is so blown about by the preferences and the whims and the forces of society that, if Jesus is popular, yeah, I'll support him. If he's not, then I have no time for him. Which group would you be in? So between now and when we come back together again, hopefully all of you will be here on Good Friday, but between now and Good Friday, not for the next few minutes, not for maybe on again and off again this afternoon, but really, honestly, seriously, purposely, this week, consider, if Jesus were to examine you as he did those along the Hosanna Road that day, if he were to examine you personally as you are right now, what would he do? Would he weep over you?